Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
What does confrontational mean? It means you'll fight for what you believe.
Enough was enough! And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother!
It is not merely our privilege to be strong, it is our duty to be strong.
Hi everyone, welcome to Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp, and I know I put out that I was going to do a live stream with Rod Roberts today in the New South Wales Parliament. Unfortunately, the parliamentary live Wi-Fi wasn't up to scratch, and just as we sat down to record the interview, everything was working well, and it just went kaput. So we carried on. I had to record the interview. Unfortunately, we weren't able to live stream it, but here it is now. It's all ready, and it was a great interview with Rod Roberts, the Deputy President of the Legislative Council, which is the upper house in the New South Wales Parliament. Very prestigious appointment that Rod has there. He gets to host foreign dignitaries. He commands the Parliament when the President is not there. The President is the equivalent of the Speaker in the lower house. So Rod has a very important role in the New South Wales Parliament, and he's had quite a journey in there as well. So it's definitely an interesting interview. Before we get to it, I just want to let you know how you can support us by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. Now, if you want to throw us a few dollars, please head to Buy Me a Coffee. Any donations from you is much appreciated. It helps to pay for the live stream. It helps to pay for the website and a whole bunch of other things, plans that we have that we would like to do as well. And of course, it gives me that warm and fuzzy feeling inside, which is very important. Just like Gail Morgan did this week. Gail bought me a coffee and she said, heard you at the Wingdang rally today. Met you at Parliament House rally. Love your dedication and podcast. This coffee is overdue. We need good people like you in this fight for a rational energy policy against these destructive, unrecyclable green wrecking machines. Well, Gail, you're spot on the money, and thank you very much for your contribution to me and Commanding the Narrative. It's much appreciated. And yes, we do need to push back against all this renewable garbage that is happening in our country. I spoke about this with Rod Roberts in this interview, so stay tuned for that. Another way of supporting us is by heading to our t-shirt shop. You can head to xcandidates.t-shirts.net.au and get yourself a Commanding the Narrative or ex-candidates t-shirt. You can head around the town, very stylish in those t-shirts, I must say. Very good quality t-shirts as well, which I was very impressed with. And lastly, if you want to stay up to date with everything that we do on Commanding the Narrative and the ex-candidates, and also the Global Discussion Forum. We had a Global Discussion Forum with Ian Plimer on Sunday night, which was fantastic. If you want to be part of those, you need to sign up to my newsletter. Just at the top right-hand corner up there, it says sign up. That's the best way to stay up to date with everything that we do, all the podcasts, all the articles, all the events coming up. There's a fantastic event coming up in Oberon at the end of the month, which I'll tell you more about in the future episodes. But all that information's on the website. You'll get a weekly newsletter that has everything that you need to stay up to date. So please head to commandingthenarrative.com. Very easy to remember. And please sign up to the newsletter. But without further ado, I hope you really enjoy this interview with Rod Roberts. And again, I do apologize that we weren't able to live stream this, but sometimes we have to depend on the technology that's there. And I did do some prior research to see if the Wi-Fi in Parliament House was up to scratch. I was told that it was. Unfortunately, you can't always control these situations. So please enjoy Rod Roberts. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp, recording in the New South Wales Parliament with the Deputy President of the Legislative Council, Mr. Rod Roberts. How are you, Rod?
I'm well, Stephen, and yourself?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for inviting me on your show.
No, it's a real pleasure because I've known you for quite a while now, and you've had a interesting ride through the parliament. You're in a very well-respected position now as an independent. How are you finding it as an independent? Are you enjoying it? Is it different than being with a party? Or, what's your view of it all so far?
Yeah, look, it is a little bit different, Stephen, but down to the real hard work of a politician, and that's prosecuting arguments and putting positions and policies forward, it's not much different. My position and platform hasn't changed simply because I've left a party and become an independent. My views and belief and ethos hasn't changed with that. So I'm basically still doing very, very similar work, still arguing those points that I used to argue before, just without the issues that come with a party that's attached to it hanging over my head.
And I know you're doing a lot of media with Ray Hadley and Ben Fordham and on TNT radio. Is that different? Are you being treated differently now that you're independent by media and maybe some of your parliamentary colleagues?
Look, there's definitely been a change in attitude, and people have said to me, face to face to me, said, look, it's much easier to be seen to be dealing with you now that you're an independent and not associated with that party that you used to be associated with.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Now, in a previous life, you were a detective, and law and order is a massive focus of yours. How do you view law and order in New South Wales currently? I know you've been critical of the police commissioner and also the police minister. What are your views on those two roles and their performance?
Look, it pains me to say this, Stephen, because you're right. I was a detective, and those in your audience that don't know, I was a detective for over 20 years with the New South Wales Police from about 1981 through to about 2000. My wife was a detective for nearly 25 years, so we've sort of got blue in our blood, so to speak. So it pains me to say this, but I have never seen the New South Wales Police Force in a dire position that it is today.
Dire.
It is in dire position. Morale is at an absolute low. We are at least 2,500 police under strength in New South Wales. I have figures, and your audience are getting a bit of a preview of this. I'm doing a story with Ben Fordham tomorrow morning in relation to recruiting and retention. We are losing double the amount of police each year that we are able to recruit. And it's not simply just a matter of recruiting those to leave. We're losing police with very, very extensive experience, and that's something you can't teach in a couple of months at the academy. So when these young coppers, girls and boys, are coming out with the best intentions, they don't have any senior police left to train them. And we all know that you can learn so much through a textbook, no matter what the trade is. But being stuck beside a true tradesman will teach you really how to apply what you've learned in the textbooks. And policing is no different. And that's what we're running into at the moment. So we have a severe lack of police. That's demonstrated in our road toll at the moment. The road toll here in New South Wales is one of the worst it's been in years. It is a tragedy what's happening on our roads. And I think anybody that drives around will tell you they don't see any cops around anymore. That's because there is none. So you've got the road toll, you've got rising crime rates. We've seen what's happened in bush areas. Now, the police cannot recruit to rural towns. And we've seen, not just previously, but we know it continues to exist, there is a crime wave in some rural towns and cities here in New South Wales that can't be addressed because we don't have the police to do so. We know for a fact that there are some police stations in Sydney that are running around about 60% of capacity. And because police have to respond 24 hours a day, there's cops doing overtime and working on their traditional days off, which is just piling additional workload onto them, causing them to burn out and subsequently leave. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at the moment. So the minister has been quoted as saying, we're going to recruit from New Zealand. Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's be honest. If you're a copper in New Zealand, bearing in mind the Australian dollar is about 10% stronger than New Zealand dollar, why would you want to leave New Zealand, lose 10% of your money and come to Sydney where nobody can afford to buy a house in the first place?
Yeah.
So, and cops aren't on the world's best money. So nobody's going to come from New Zealand. That's just a smoke screen and an announcement that you could make to look good. What the problem is we're not paying our police enough. We have the lowest paid police force in Australia. So the temptation is for other coppers to go to Queensland or Victoria, where they get paid more money for doing exactly the same job. So first of all, we need to retain those cops we've got, and that is pay them properly. Then we need to be able to recruit. Now, I argued this probably started over 3 years ago when finally government has listened. We didn't pay recruits when they went into the academy from day one. So they had to be self-funded. They then leave with a HECS debt as well. The academies in Goulburn, so they provide their own accommodation. So there was all these barriers in front of people that wanted to join the police force in the first place. And I argued, because when I joined back in 1981, you were paid from the day you went in. Every other police force in Australia pays you from the day you walk into the academy. The New South Wales Ambulance Service pays you from the day you start training, and so does the New South Wales Fire Brigade. So the police force was an outlier, and therefore people didn't want to join because of the financial burdens it would place upon them. So I argued for that. That's been rectified to some degree at the moment, in that they now pay recruits when they go into the academy. Not a significant wage, but enough to help them get by, I suppose. So we really need to look at what's the barriers for recruiting. And I ask you this, Stephen, and your audience, have you ever seen any advertisements on mainstream media, TV channels, newspapers, radio shows saying that New South Wales Police is recruiting? No, you haven't.
No.
So I don't know what it is they're doing, but I know whatever it is they're doing is not working. And if it's not working, it needs to be changed and addressed.
Believe it or not, I did work experience with the police when I was in year 10, so that would have been the year 2000.
You might have been attached to me, were you, Steve?
No, it's Marrickville Police Station.
Right, okay.
And I remember distinctive, on the back of their door, they had their roster, and there was a whole load of names there. And what really struck me was that half of them were on either leave, some sort of mental leave or sick leave or whatever it might be. That was back then. So this is not something that's just sprung up out of nowhere. This is a systemic long-term problem, is it?
Well, it appears to be, but it seems to have got worse and exasperated over the last couple of years. And we've got to the stage now where the thin blue line is that thinly stretched. It's broken in places, and it needs to be fixed because society needs to have a strong and robust police force. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life that we don't live in utopia where everybody does what they're supposed to do. So we need police to prevent crime and also to detect those that commit crime and prosecute them for the whole of society, to make it a safe place for us to live in. Well, that's not happening at the moment because we just don't have enough cops.
Is it just a matter of them not getting paid enough, or they're overworked, or is it? I mean, I used to hear stories of police being incredibly frustrated because they would do the hard work of locking up the criminals, and then they would go into court and be let off with a slap on the wrist almost. Is that part of the frustration as well?
Look, you've nailed it on the head. That's part of it, Stephen. It's not the only thing. There's not one individual issue that's causing this. There are numbers, and one of them is that frustration that the police aren't supported by the judiciary. You know, the police will lock people up, and before the police have finished the paperwork, the crook's back out on the street again. And then you have all the supervision that the police are under. Now, I understand that they need to be regulated, and I'm all for that. But you have so many independent bodies minutely dissecting everything the police do. Now, police make a decision there and then on the spot. It's an instantaneous decision they've got to make. But in courtrooms and law enforcement conduct commissions and all sorts of different inquiries, barristers and judges can pick it apart, taking days, weeks, months sometimes, to decipher what police made an instant decision on. So it's an extremely, extremely difficult job, and my heart goes out to the men and women on the front line that are doing those hard yards. And not only that, they are now not supported by the hierarchy of the police. The police hierarchy has this attitude of looking after themselves, and if excuse the expression, covering their own arse, and they won't stand by and support the frontline workers that are doing the hard work.
We recently had some big events in Sydney. There was the Bondi stabbing at the Westfields there. Also, it was 2 days later, there was the stabbing of the Bishop Marmari Manuel. One of the things that you talked about after that was the Richmond report. which was around mental illness and how to deal with people with mental illness. That might have been a little bit before my time. I didn't know too much about it. What can you tell us about the Richmond report and its significance in these stabbings?
Yeah, look, the Richmond report dates back a couple of decades now, Stephen. Look, and I want to be careful how I say this because I honestly believe in this, but there are some people in society that are so affected by mental illness that they cannot and should not be allowed to wander our streets. And I know that that's a harsh statement, but unfortunately it's fact. And that's been demonstrated by the Bondi stabbing, for example. This bloke's homeless. He's roaming the streets, had been homeless for some time. What used to happen back in the day, and there was institutions and people would have heard of them, there was Callum Park and Rozelle and Morisset, Kenmore and Goulburn. They were institutions run by the Department of Health that these people were, I'm going to say detained in, but detained's not, housed in. And they were able to be kept occupied every day by doing stimulating projects, might have been art, might have been gardening, but they were given a sense of purpose. They had a roof over their head, so you didn't have this homeless situation. They were given 3 meals a day, and more importantly, it was ensured that they got the medication they need. Richmond came along, some left-wing, civil libertarian that said, look, this is wrong to house these people in these sorts of institutions and they deserve to be on the streets like normal human beings. Well, there's a lot to be said for that. But we're seeing what's happened now. These people are living homeless, they're living rough. Nobody's taking their medication. Hence, they're into psychotic episodes. And again, we saw that at Bondi, and we've seen it numerous occasions. That's just the one that most people are familiar with because it was such a tragic set of circumstances and so highly publicised. But these incidents are happening nearly every day of the week. So in an utopian world, there would be mental health workers out there on the street with them that would ensure that they've got somewhere to live, ensure that they're getting 3 meals a day, and more importantly, ensure that they're taking their medication so that they don't have any of these episodes and the rest of us can live safely. Well, that doesn't happen, and we've seen it all. We all see it. You walk the streets some days and you see some people, and even me, with my background and experience, see some people some days I think, I'm crossing the other side of the road just to get away from this guy. Yeah. So, and that's an unfortunate thing, but it's fact. And I'm not scared to say that, right? Someone says, you can't talk about people like that. Well, it's true. And it's for their benefit as well.
But see, that's the problem. And it's a problem with a lot of issues. People just want to look at it from the surface level. They don't want to scratch beneath that surface and dig deep into an issue. Because if you do, you may find that there are issues that you've raised there. It seems to be a big problem with the way that policy is formulated, not just with this circumstance, but like you can say about climate change and a whole bunch of different issues. People are not willing to really scratch beneath the surface, and sometimes you need a bit of that tough love or whatever it might be. That's usually the best outcome. You can't just put people on the streets if they can't fend for themselves and look after themselves. It's one thing to say, put them on the streets, they can be in charge of their own medication. Well, a lot of the times they might be okay for a while, and maybe they can do that for a year or so, but then they come off, and that's when you have some big issues.
Well, exactly right. Like, in terms of these people themselves, we're really letting them down as well, aren't we? Yeah. By leaving them on the streets, letting them sleep rough, letting them sleep homeless, letting them not get 3 meals a day, let them not have a roof over their head, let them not take their medication. Is that really doing them any good? I know it's certainly not doing society as a whole any good, but we're really letting these people down by letting this happen. And the whole idea of the Richmond report, I think at the end of the day, was to save money. So we closed all these institutions and turned these people out on the street. So it didn't become a government issue anymore. And local charities tended to pick up the slack and feed these people and try and house them. So it was a cost-saving, if you look at it, it was probably done as a cost-saving exercise, but it's cost society a lot more, in terms of the tragedies that we've seen happen.
And if we want to focus on knife crime, obviously you can ban guns, but you can't really ban knives. Is there a way that we can address these big stabbings? Like, is there any way to stop them?
Well, I think for a start, we need tougher knife crime penalties. There is absolutely no excuse whatsoever to be walking around the street with a knife. Now, there is certain exceptions, of course. That might be somebody that's going fishing, that's carrying a rod and a fishing tackle box with them. Clearly, they're going fishing. There might be a chef on his way to work that might have a couple of knives with him. But I think that's rare because mainly the knives will stay in the restaurant. But there is that odd occasion. But clearly they're tools of trade, and that's easily explained. But for a 17-year-old, 18-year-old male to be walking around with a knife in his back pocket at around the local train station, I can't see any reason for that happening. And what we need to do is toughen up. Now, the Minns government introduced tougher knife crime, and what they did was they bounced up the penalties. They said, we're going to make it tougher. So they increased the financial penalties. And I argued that this is not strong enough. The penalty increased to something like $4,000. Where's a 17-year-old going to get $4,000 from to pay the fine? So we need to set an example. We need to have the judiciary imprison people that are carrying knives as a deterrent to try and stop this from happening. Now, we're not going to stop those that have mental illnesses. Right? Unfortunately, that's a fact of life. But if the police search somebody on the streets and find them with a knife, they need to be able to make society safer. So that means imprisoning these people, well, then so be it. I don't care because no one I know, no decent individual that I know or mix with or associate with carries a knife.
You don't even think about it.
You don't even. What's the point? You don't even think about that. And let me tell you, if they were guns, we'd be screaming from the rooftops, saying, lock these people up. Well, there's more knife crimes now than there are firearms crimes. There are more murders committed each year by knives than there are guns. Yet we seem to say, it's only just a knife. Well, and I know you can't ban knives because in my time as a detective, the most common murder weapon I ever came across was the Wiltshire Stay Sharp knife out of the top drawer in a domestic murder or something like that. You can't ban that. So we need to find those, or we need to impose penalties, stricter, tougher penalties on those that are caught in public carrying a knife with no lawful excuse.
If you were to become police minister in a hypothetical world, I'm sure you've got a list of things you'd love to implement. Can you give us a taste of something that you'd love to do? Well,
first of all, I'd like to really stand behind and support the men and women of the New South Wales Police for a start. That's the first thing. They need to know that you are there with having their back and there to support them through the tough times and the good times. Because you'll often see the ministers fluffing around at attestation parades at Goulburn when they attest new constables and all that sort of stuff. And you'll see ministers there pinning medals on the chest of people. But when things go tits up, you don't see the minister anywhere. They're wiping their hands of it. They don't want anything to do with it. So that's the first thing. You then need to argue inside Cabinet with the Attorney General and the other leaders for tougher penalties. And you need to then argue that the judiciary needs to enforce those tougher penalties. So there's quite a few things. And of course, that then leads to the retention and recruitment of police to get our numbers back up to where they need to be.
How do you do it though? Because if you're going to say to someone that you're recruiting to the police, you're going to say, well, you're most likely going to be underpaid. As you said, rural areas, there's crime waves. So you're going to be thrown into potentially an area like that, and you're going to have to try and get in control of things and build it all back up. It's a bit of a daunting task for new recruits.
Well, it certainly is, but they need to be supported. So the first thing, to your point, is you would pay them properly in the first place. As soon as the Minns government got in, they gave teachers a $10,000 pay rise straight away because the Teachers Federation was threatening strikes, had gone on strike and everything. The New South Wales Police has a very strong union called the Police Association, but they never strike. They never take serious industrial action, and the government knows that. So they can play them off a break because the cops are that dedicated. Imagine if they downed tools and walked off the job. Imagine what would happen, the chaos that we would have in the streets.
Yeah.
So the government plays towards that. So first of all, you would pay them properly, and then in terms of recruits going to the bush, and this is something. I don't have the levers of government with me in front of me and access to Treasury and all that sort of stuff. But you would look at incentivising them to go to the rural areas. We do it with doctors. we offer them incentive packages to go to the bush because we have a lack of doctors in the bush. Well, perhaps we need to do the same thing for police. We need to be able to provide housing at a reasonable cost for them.
Yeah.
We need to perhaps give them a little bit of financial incentive to go to regional areas. I think you find once most cops go to the bush, they tend to love it.
Yeah.
But they're city-born kids. They don't know, so they don't want to experiment and try it. But if we incentivise them to go out there, chances are they'll stay, they'll become part of the community. The kids go to school there, they play sport there, and they get wrapped up. And I mean, that's what happened to me when I moved to Goulburn 30 years ago and still living in Goulburn today.
You've never left.
Never left. Never left.
I want to shift focus to the men's government. So you're in the upper house, so you're elected to a 8-year term. So the first 4 years of that, you were with a coalition government. Now it's a Labor government with Chris Minns as the premier. He did something the other day where it was around Anzac Day and having businesses have to close for Anzac Day, which is something I thought was a good thing, and it's probably the first action by a Labor government, whether it be federal or state, that I have supported for as long as I can remember. What is your assessment of Chris Minns so far? He's a pretty slick operator. Is he running a good government?
Well, let's take this in two parts. Let's go back to the Anzac Day thing first.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that the Shop Distributors Union came and saw me long before that. And I don't think they just saw me. I think they were canvassing all members of Parliament as to what our attitude is. And I was very supportive of closing trading on Anzac Day.
Yeah.
It's a national day. It's a day of pride as far as I'm concerned. It's a day that needs to remain on our calendar and the importance of it not forgotten. In this society that we have now with multi-religions, Christmas itself has started to lose importance to some people that we used to have, and therefore Easter has as well. The one day that we all have in common, apart from Australia Day, of course, is Anzac Day.
Yeah.
And we lost a lot of good men and women, and we still have those that are suffering the illnesses and injuries from war, right up until the Afghanistan and Iraq and all those other different campaigns. We need to always remember these people. So I'm a big believer in Anzac Day and a big believer in not having shops trading for a commercial purpose on Anzac Day.
Yeah.
So very supportive of that. Going back to Minns himself, look, I think Chris Minns is a nice guy, right? I think he's a very genuine sort of person. I think he has the right interests at heart, but the trouble with Chris Minns is he's in Labor, and Labor is controlled pretty much by the left.
Yeah.
So I've got a feeling that Chris Minns is going to end up like Dom Perrottet did, and he's just going to be the puppet at the end of the strings that the people see.
Really? Because he seems to have a little bit of conviction and. Do you think he just have no choice?
Look, he has plenty of conviction. I am not quibbling about the man himself, but it comes down to a numbers game. Politics is always numbers, and I think you'll find that the New South Wales Labor Party is controlled by the left.
Yeah. So
no matter what Minns' intentions are, as honourable as they are, he mightn't be able to fulfil those because the left are going to come after him.
One of the things we've discussed on previous podcasts is the difference between Minns and Anthony Albanese. And I've had some people say that Chris Minns would be a far better Prime Minister than Anthony Albanese. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I think he's a much better retail politician. I think Chris Minns comes across as genuine where Albanese doesn't. And not just comes across as genuine, I think Chris Minns is genuine. I'll just give you and your audience a little story about how person Chris Minns is. I was at a function maybe 3 years, wife with me. He was obviously on the main table. He was the leader of the opposition. I was just the assistant president of the Legislative Council at that time. So I was on the table number 2, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, during a break in the proceedings, Chris walks past. Hello, Rod, how are you going? Oh, good, Chris, yourself? Yeah, very good. Still the opposition leader he was in those days. Said, Chris, this is my wife, Lynette. Lynette, this is Chris Minns. He's the leader of the opposition. Hello, how are you going? Shook hands. They spoke a few, bit of small talk, and off Chris walked. About 2 hours later, Chris walks past our table again and says, hey, Lynn, are you enjoying your evening? And I thought to myself, there's a bloke that gets it. Yeah. He has those people skills. That's all he had to say. At the end of the night, my wife said, he's a lovely bloke. right? Because he just took the time out. You remember the name, but he took the time out to say something as he walked past the table, knowing full well that my wife would never vote for him, probably.
Yeah.
But that wasn't his purpose. So, I mean, he's a good communicator. He's a good people person.
Yeah, but being a good person is a lot different than running a good government. How's the Labor Party been in government? I know they pushed through the conversion therapy laws, and I mean, that's a little bit concerning to me. But overall, how are they going so far?
Look, to be honest with you, Stephen, I think they're a bit of a nothing government at the moment. They're quite vanilla. They did push through conversion laws because they had the numbers there. They haven't done an awful lot apart from that, though. We sit on a calendar that is dictated by the government.
Yeah,
we're not sitting anywhere near the days that we sat when we were under the control of the Liberal government, when the Parliament was controlled by the Lib coalition government. There hasn't been a real big agenda from Labor yet. I'd have thought if you're sitting in the sidelines for 12 years as opposition, when you get elected, you'll hit the ground running. Well, we haven't seen any big reforms. We haven't seen any big changes. We haven't seen a lot from them at all.
Well, that's what happened last time they were in government, if people can remember. Nothing happened. I know there was no infrastructure. I mean, the place was dead.
They played a perfect role in opposition in the lead up to the election in that they made a small target of themselves. But when you're in government, you can't be a small target. People look to you to say, well, what are you doing now? You can't hide. You can't go inside your shell. And I think that's what they're doing at the moment. I don't think they've got the gist of government yet, and that is government has to lead, government has to make decisions. Whether they're hard decisions and unpopular decisions, you still have to make them, and I don't think they're doing too much yet at all.
I watched an interview you did with Vicky Campion recently, and you were talking about hydrogen, green hydrogen, and you quoted a figure, $92 million in grants that have come from the state government to fund this green hydrogen madness that doesn't make any sense. Can you let the audience know what that's all about?
Yeah, surely. Look, this is months before Twiggy blew the whistle on the fact that green hydrogen won't float after he'd extorted all money out of governments everywhere. But
$8 billion?
And from various governments around the world that kicked into.
And when does he have to pay that back by?
Well, exactly. So months before he did that, I asked a question here on the floor of Parliament of Penny Sharp. How much money has the New South Wales taxpayer?
And she's the
leader of the government in the upper house, but she's also the Minister for Energy and Climate Change as well, which is innocuous to have those. It's a conflict, isn't it, to have energy and the environment as the same minister?
Yeah.
Very compromised. But anyway, nevertheless, so I asked her, how much money has New South Wales taxpayers provided towards green hydrogen projects, and how much hydrogen has been produced? Well, after a long-winded typical politician answer, the bottom line is there hasn't been a drop of hydrogen produced in New South Wales at all yet, and the New South Wales taxpayer is on the hook for $92 million in grants to different companies to explore hydrogen. And as you say, if it all fails, do we get any money back? No, we don't. So the taxpayer can kiss goodbye to that, because we know that you cannot make green hydrogen here in New South Wales. You can't make it in Australia, but more importantly, you can't make it here in New South Wales because the cost of electricity is so high. And who uses electricity to make electricity? How does that make any sense at all? We have to burn electricity to make electricity. And we do it by, separating the hydrogen from the oxygen in the water. But we're a dry continent. Why would we be using the limited resource of water that we have and taking the hydrogen out of it? It doesn't make any sense at all. It was Twiggy Forrest and some of these others virtue signalling, going to be Prince Planet, save the world, look at us. But we won't do it with our own money. We need some government taxpayers' money first.
Yeah.
If it was that good, they'd fund it themselves because they know that there would be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. This is just fantasy land. And I've spoken to some very astute businessmen, very, very astute, who can sniff a dollar anywhere. And they've said, mate, we're not going anywhere near this. We are not going near hydrogen because it will never get off the ground.
From my understanding, you can't even ship it because it's so small. It goes through the metal or whatever the container that you're trying to ship it in. It just leaks through it. Is that right?
Well, that's my understanding. Now, I am no expert, and I'm the first to say that. I want to make this declaration. But I've been told the same thing. It cannot go through normal piping. So this thing about running your gas stoves and your heaters at home on hydrogen, they tell me that every single pipe has to be ripped up and a new type of pipe go in.
Yeah.
Now, as I say, I don't know if that's factual because I don't have those degrees of expertise. But I know a little bit, and I've done a bit of reading and research, and that's what I've found. And you're right, you can't transport it, you can't do anything with it.
My philosophy with government is I like small government. I don't like them to be spending too much money. I don't like them to be in debt. But when it comes to something like infrastructure, I don't mind them spending money on infrastructure because that money just goes into so many different parts of the community, whether it be the construction companies or the workers on the side or all the businesses that flow in it, even the cafes that have to look after the workers when they're working. I mean, I work in construction. I can see how much an infrastructure project can support the community, and there's a lot of benefit that comes from that. But when we're talking about projects like this, $92 million basically going into a black hole, and we have nothing to show for it. Imagine we could have built a hospital or a new road somewhere. We could have had at least something to show for it, even if it does go over budget and we spend a lot of money on it. I know the Sydney Harbour Bridge apparently went over budget. But we've got something to show for it that stands the test of time. We don't have anything to show for this money.
I reckon you and I should swap spots, Stephen, and you should take over my role here in New South Wales Parliament because that's exactly what I say. Yeah. Look, we know that we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. We know the New South Wales government is broke. We know that. They'll tell you that themselves. The Treasurer stands up and tells you that there's no money in the kitty. It's no different than your family budget. If things are tight, you are very, very careful on what you spend it on. Yeah. You want to see a good return for your money. And I subscribe. I've had my own small businesses over the years, and that I subscribe to that you've got to spend $1 to make $1. But you've got to be careful where you spend it on. And infrastructure is there forever. As you say, it has a flow-on effect all through the economy. It lifts productivity. It does all sorts of things, and there's something to see for it. But $98 million on a pipe dream of green hydrogen, the projection is it's going to do that. And the projections are this. Well, projections are just that. And at the end of the day, the bottom line was, well, how much have you produced so far? Oh, we haven't produced anything. Nothing. So how's that a good expenditure of our money? And as I said, if this was such a perfect scheme, they wouldn't be asking for government assistance.
That's right.
You don't see gas companies asking for government assistance, all these oil production, etc. They're just getting on doing it because they know it'll work. I
hear this argument from the left all the time that renewables are the cheapest form of power, and if when you leave it to the private investor, that's why they're all going after renewables because it's the best way to produce energy. I'm like, yeah, but you're ignoring the subsidies that these companies are getting. And here's the scam. A lot of this money gets paid before these projects are even built. They can propose a wind farm and it gets rejected because, a lot of the time it's the community causing a ruckus, and good on them for doing so, trying to push back against these projects. But they still get paid to a point. They might not get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow like you mentioned before, but they still get a substantial amount of money in the process.
Yeah, for feasibility studies and all this sort of stuff. No, look, you're exactly right. It's... renewable energies are the cheapest form of energy. Well, they are. When I say that, they're not. But if you go with this, certainly the sun costs nothing and certainly the wind costs nothing.
That's all they want to focus on.
That's what they tell you. They don't tell you about the cost of the infrastructure in putting up the wind turbines, nor the solar factories, nor the cost of linking it into the infrastructure and getting the power out to where it goes. That's where the cost is. Sure, the sun and wind's free. Yeah. But nothing comes for nothing, right? And it's a fallacy and it's a falsehood to say that it's the cheapest form of renewables because it's all subsidised. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't stack up.
That's right. You raised two separate things. One was housing, the other was energy. I want to talk about both. Maybe we'll just discuss housing very quickly because in another life as well, you're a real estate agent, so you have some experience and some ideas around this. The Minns government is proposing building these high-rise near near train stations to try and boost the housing supply. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I'm going to be honest, and Stephen, and say I have conflicting views, and let me explain that. Councils over the years have been given the opportunity to build and develop, but councils have neglected their role. A lot of councils have, that they've made it too hard for developers to build, certain restrictions, certain housing projects. And I understand the need sometimes for some regulation. We can't have an open slather. But councils have sort of buggered it for themselves, really, by not assisting development. So therefore, we're at a shortfall now. But then again, I don't want to see the Minns government say, okay, you can build these multi-storey towers everywhere, because what we don't have in some of those suburbs is the infrastructure to go with it.
Yeah.
You build these apartment blocks, where hundreds and thousands, well, not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of people live in these apartment blocks. No extra parking spaces, cars parked out the street. Most homes now, not all, but most are two-car families, right? They build an apartment, then not every apartment even gets a parking space. So you get all that. You don't have the infrastructure to support these additional people thrown in there. So I don't want to seem like I'm walking both sides of the fence, but I can see pros and cons for both arguments. And the trouble is with government, they make a one-size-fits-all plan. Yeah. Right? And that's not how it should be. There are certain areas that have the geographical space or transport infrastructure or green space as well to cope with that, but there's others that can't. So you don't just say, every railway station you're allowed to build multi-storey towers, because it just won't work like that. So, certainly there's a need for further development. I've spoken to a number of developers, and in fact, Harry Triggerboth, I've had the occasion to meet on a number of times.
He owns Meriton.
He owns Meriton,
yep.
And talks about the frustration that he has in trying to do developments. Now, Harry is building up on the Gold Coast. He has a number of projects built and underway up there. And I said, well, why up there, Harry? He said, because they support us. If you put a DA in Queensland, and I'm pretty sure it's 6 months, if you haven't heard back from the council in 6 months, it's deemed under the legislation to be approved, and you start turning dirt straight away.
Wow.
So he said they're welcoming him development. And anybody that's been up the Gold Coast lately will tell you there's just multi-storey towers going up everywhere. There's cranes dotting the skyline.
They don't even have people to put in them.
Well, I don't know. Maybe people leaving New South Wales and moving to the Gold Coast.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, at least there'll be housing there, because there's certainly none here.
Yeah. So back to energy, and housing is a big thing. I'd love to talk to you more about it, but energy is massive as well, and particularly because you're down in Goulburn. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of this stuff down there. You're speaking to people in rural communities, people living in the cities, especially teal electorates where I'm in. And I've spoken about this at different rallies. A lot of the people that are advocating for these renewable projects, Chris Bowen, Tanya Plebiscite, Anthony Albanese, all the teals, Sophie Scamps, Sally Stegel, Allegra Spender, all in Sydney. So all of this stuff that they're building is out of sight, out of mind for the people that are voting for them. They don't see what's going on. I was down at the Illawarra a weekend or so ago speaking at a rally, and the offshore wind farm that they're planning to build there is over 1,000 square kilometres. To put that in perspective, Singapore is about 735 square kilometres. This one's going to be bigger than that. New York City is about 790 square kilometres or so. Now, you think that's bad. There's other ones also going on around the country. The worst is in Gippsland. That's going to be 15,000 square kilometres. Now, this is offshore wind farms. If you talk about on land, we have 5 renewable energy zones in New South Wales, the central West Orana in the middle, which takes in the towns of Mudgee, Dubbo, Dunedin, Wellington, a whole bunch of Coolah is another one. It's going to be over 20,000 square kilometres of renewable projects all condensed in one area. And they tell us that renewables is the cheapest form of energy. Well, just imagine the money that it's going to take to build the turbines, wind turbines, build the solar panels, build the high voltage transmission lines that are going to be crisscrossing people's grazing land and agricultural land to get out to these projects. It's just complete and utter madness to me. Yet we have the coalition who's just come out and announced their nuclear policy. And I know you and Mark Latham pushed for the ban on nuclear energy to be lifted in New South Wales when you first stepped into the parliament. How do you feel about the coalition's federal policy to transition to nuclear instead of these massive renewable projects? And I hate calling them renewables, but that's, sometimes
we all know what
we get trapped into using their terminology. But
look, I'm a big supporter of the coalition's policy on nuclear. You rightly said, as when Mark and I first got in New South Wales in 2019, so some 5.5 years ago now, we put forward a private members bill to lift the ban on uranium mining in New South Wales in the first place.
Yeah.
To get a nuclear project going, you have to lift the ban on mining it. It was defeated. There was no appetite in the...
and that was the very first thing that you guys did, wasn't it?
Yeah, very first bill. Mark introduced it. Very first thing that we did, because we could see that was the way to go for reliable baseload power, with less emissions. So that was defeated. More strength for Peter Dutton on pursuing this policy at the moment. Every advanced economy that you can think of uses nuclear energy. The UK, the US, Germany, France, China themselves now, India, all these manufacturing economies are all using nuclear, but not us. And in fact, we can't even have a sensible debate about it. When Dutton first brought this forward, you remember that Labor Party's, their form of counter policy was to bring out memes of fish with 3 eyes.
Yeah.
Remember that? That's the adult discussion that they brought to the table. So good luck to Peter. I support it. I think it's a great idea. It will be cheaper in the long run because, of course, the opposition to it always picks out, it's going to cost so much to build these power stations, but they've got longevity about them. And the other cost-factoring saver of them, Stephen, is they'll build them attached to the grid.
Yep.
So we don't need to string up thousands and thousands of kilometres and hundreds of these big monstrosity towers across our prime rural grazing area to be able to put electricity into the system.
I've spoken to people in the nuclear industry, and we do have a nuclear industry in Australia. That's the big lie. They say, we don't have no, it's there. Lucas Heights has been there, and it's a world leader of the type of nuclear stuff that they do down there, like the silicon isotopes and all the medical grade stuff that they do. But in speaking to them, I asked them, what's it going to cost? They're honest to their own detriment. They say, look, we don't know. And then the other side take that and say, well, it's going to be a huge amount, and they can't even put a price on it. Well, what they say is, we don't know how much it's going to cost, but as you start building more and more of it, it scales down. It'll get cheaper and cheaper. I mean, this is the problem. The nuclear industry are being completely honest about it and say, look, we can't put a figure on it, but the left jump on that and use it against them.
Well, of course, the left will only tell you what they want you to know. It's like them saying renewables are the cheapest form of power going because the wind costs nothing, the sun costs nothing. They neglect to tell you about all the other costs that go with it as well, the infrastructure, building the towers, all these solar panels, what's going to happen to all them when they reach the end of life. That's another discussion we'll have very shortly.
Just to cut in the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, Grant Piper, who's the chairman of the National Rational Energy Network, he's been painstakingly tallying up all these projects because you can't go to a government website and find the complete tally of everything. But he's had to go through every single project, put it in a spreadsheet. What he's calculated is there's going to be over 1,000 wind turbines, but over 9 million solar panels.
And where are they putting these solar panels, Stephen? Let me tell you, they're putting them on prime agricultural grazing land in some of our best country. Australia used to have a manufacturing base once upon a time. We made cars, we made refrigerators, we made toasters, we made lawnmowers, we made everything here. We're pretty self-sufficient. We don't have a manufacturing industry anymore, right? It's all been shipped offshore. What we do have, though, and what is sought around the world is our agricultural products. We have a reputation worldwide of producing top-grade agricultural products, whether it be meat, grains, fruit, vegetable, our wines even, our fisheries, our seafood, all sought after everywhere, and we get a premium price for it. That's our niche at the moment. We need to protect that as an economy base for Australia, as an income source for our country. But no, not these brain-dead idiots. Let's just cover all this good countryside in these big solar panels. So we're to our own detriment. I mean, and they're putting them on these countries because they're clear already, they're flat, and they're easy to service like that. But at the same time, that's our prime country, and we need to protect that at all costs.
And people might think, oh, well, so what? You know, it's flat. It's, you know, just put the solar panels there. But from what I'm told is there's a thing called soil, what's it called again? Soil baking, whereas, you know, you need to turn the soil all the time to, you know, keep the nutrients in there and whatever. If you're just putting solar panels on there for 20 years, you're just baking that soil and basically becomes dead at the end of the day. Am I off track?
Well, no, but can I add further to that? This is where my concern is, and again, I've raised this in Parliament. If a mine wants to open in New South Wales, the Mining Act says that you have to lodge a rehabilitation bond with the government. And the idea is this: if your mine goes belly up, and you as the company go broke and you walk away, there's a bloody big hole in the ground that somebody has to be left to fix up. So the rehabilitation bond then funds that land to be rehabilitated back to the way it was, back to grazing country or whatever it happens to be. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. Well, if that's the case with mines, why don't we do this with solar?
This is the trap.
Solar factories.
Yep.
Because you and I know that they've got a shelf life, maybe 15, perhaps 20 years max, right? They are full of toxic chemicals. So at the end of the day, if a company says it's running one of these solar factories, and I've got to be careful I don't say solar farms because that's what they want to say, but they're farms, they are not. Yeah. They're not farms. These solar factories, if they walk away at the end of the day and say, oh, listen, we're bankrupt, we've got nothing left, who's going to clean up all this mess? Because if those panels are left to sit there and deteriorate, that will leach into the soil, and we know it will leach into the water table, and bingo, there goes our agricultural economy.
But it's so dangerous as well. Up in Queensland, they had a hailstorm recently and just wiped out the whole solar factory.
Yeah,
with the hailstones.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. So who's going to rehabilitate this? Who's going to look after this?
Yeah,
you know. So and there's a plan. Do exactly like you do with mines. Just transfer it over. Well, so I asked this question of Penny Sharp on the floor of Parliament yet again. Answer is no, we're not going to do that. These solar farms or solar factories, are there for the long haul, and they'll be fine.
How can they be there for the long haul?
Exactly.
Look, my understanding is like a lot of these farmers, they'll be pro wind turbines because they go, oh well, you know, I get $100,000 a year to have each turbine on my property, blah, blah, blah. They're not considering the decommissioning. And apparently there are some contracts where the companies that build these do have a clause in there to decommission it at the end. But if they sell, and a lot of these projects are sold, you know, the company that builds it sells it on to someone else, and they could potentially either not have that clause in there when the new contract is signed, or they can just declare bankruptcy and say, oh, you know, we're out of money now, we can't do anything. The bill is left to the farmer, the landowner then. Yep. They have to hold the bag.
Exactly right. And that's what I'm saying. And that's why we need these rehabilitation bonds, because these companies will deliberately go bankrupt. They'll be a $2 shelf company to start with. They'll walk away and somebody's going to be left to clean up the mess. And it'll be an environmental disaster. So here we are trying to save the environment, allegedly, by ruining the environment.
Yeah. A big problem of all of this stuff, it's all happening out in rural communities. The electorate of Parkes federally is a third of New South Wales. It's similar in New South Wales. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. Barwon, there you go. Third of New South Wales. So they get one member in Parliament to advocate for them. Even if they can elect someone that really supports their cause, you still only get one vote in the Parliament. The cities are condensed with a whole bunch of MPs. A lot of them have probably never even been out to a farm. They don't know what they're talking about. They're advocating for all this stuff, but they don't really understand the full impact. And I've spoken to regional people, and they've said, we've never seen any teals out here. Chris Bowen only comes out for a photo opportunity or whatever it might be.
And flies in on his private jet while Albanese flies in on his jet too. Remember that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. How do we even address this? Because in a lot of ways, people in rural and regional communities are underrepresented, and they're the ones having to face all this stuff. How do we waken up the people in the city to the issues that are happening out of sight, out of mind in the country?
Well, that's a big issue, Stephen, and very hard to address, because it's easy for city folk to sit around and use the old analogy, sip their lattes and say, oh, we want clean energy, blah, blah, blah. They're not putting up with this stuff in their backyard or looking at it day in, day out, nor is it affecting their livelihood. So to them, they don't care. But if you go out into some of these regional communities that it is really ripping apart, they'll tell you it is a major issue. So there is a big disparity between regional people and city people in terms of what the reality is surrounding, these renewable projects.
Yeah, definitely. Now, to finish up, when you became an independent, you stood up in Parliament and said, I'm committing political suicide by doing this. You're still serving your final 4 years, so you've got 3 years left. 2.5 years left in the Parliament.
Yeah.
Hopefully there is a pathway for you after this. You can find some way of getting re-elected somehow. But in those final 2.5 years, do you have any goals or aims of what you'd like to achieve while you're still in the Parliament?
Look, I realise that I'm only one voice as an individual, so therefore it's very hard to achieve anything on your own as such. But I want to continue to push the lines that I have for the last 5.5 years, and that is looking after those with no voice, such as the rural people that are getting walked over by these big projects. I was recently on the committee looking into undergrounding of these lines, and my belief was in some instances it is more appropriate to put these cables underground than it is above ground, and would certainly appease a lot of community concern. So I want to continue to argue those things. I want to continue to be the voice for small business, because nobody seems to be that at the moment. I want to be the voice of people that just generally aren't heard because they're not represented by the two big parties. And if you're not a member of the trade union movement, Labor apparently doesn't want to know you. The Liberal Party at the moment, well, I'm a Conservative at heart, but I'm really worried about where the Liberal Party in New South Wales is going at the moment. They don't seem to know themselves. So, for the average mum and dads on the streets, they need someone that's going to stand up for them, and that's what I've done, and that's what I'll continue to do.
And speaking of the Liberal Party, you said you supported Peter Dutton's policy on nuclear. Do you think that he's a good leader? Do you think he can turn the Liberal Party in the right direction? Because I feel there's a lot of disaffected Liberal Party people out there, and we've met a lot of them in different minor parties, and unfortunately I feel, just from my experience, the minor parties take a lot of good people and then chew them up and spit them out, when essentially we should all be in the one party. It's just that for a lot of people, they feel like the Liberal Party has let them down, and the National Party too. We tend to neglect the National Party. I think it will take strong leadership to get it back on track, but do you think they have a future?
Well, I hope they do. I really hope they do. It will take strong leadership, but it'll also take strong policy. And I mean, he's come out now and said nuclear, because previous Liberal parties, coalition parties, have just been very much like Labor. Let's not forget, it was the New South Wales coalition that started this renewable energy push in New South Wales.
Matt Keane.
Yeah. And while we're at it, the Nats voted for it. Now the Nats are up in arms out in Western New South Wales when they realised what they voted for. The only people that voted against it was me and Mark Latham in that marathon 36 hours sitting here in New South Wales Parliament.
And where were the shooters?
Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up. The shooters did come and assist us at certain times during that 36 hours, but they went off to have a sleep every now and again as well.
And they generally vote Labor, with Labor?
Yeah, generally they do.
Okay.
But as I say, so it was Matt Keane, right, who was the downfall of the Liberal Party in New South Wales as far as I'm concerned. It was his idea, these renewable energy zones, and the Nats just tagged along blindly because, we've got to look to be green and all this sort of stuff, and now they're reaping what they've sown. So I chuckle and I tell people the facts. They go, oh, well, the Nats are really up in arms about this. I said, well, the Nats voted for it. They couldn't foresee this. We could foresee it. and voted against it. So going back to the Liberal Party, the leadership, but they need a policy position. So Dutton's taken a stand there. He's taken a stand on the immigration issues. He needs to get a bit more tougher on that because that goes towards housing, and we can talk about that on another occasion. That's what people want and that's what people need, and people will be attracted by that because Albanese is just like a cork in the ocean. He's just bobbing around anywhere, wherever he happens to pop up, makes some glib statement about something and blasts off again, right? It's all motherhood statements. It's a word salad. There's nothing really to it at all. So there is an opportunity for Dutton. I hope he grabs it because we don't need this Labor government at all.
And what was your feeling when Matt Keane stood down?
Oh, thank Christ. Good riddance. See you later. But look what happened.
Well, look what happened the next day. He's standing up on stage with
Albanese. Yeah. So you tell me Keane should never have been in the Liberal Party in the first place.
Do you think they've been infiltrated?
Of course they have been. Of course they have been. Have a look at some of their policies. They're no different than Labor. They walked away from their base. That's why they lost the last election in federal. That's why they lost the New South Wales election. They stood for nothing. They had no differential between themselves and Labor. So, I'm sure the Liberal Party's been infiltrated. I get on very well with Liberal members in here, and some of them will tell you that, you know. And as I said, I'm a Conservative, so it hurts me to say this. But have a look at them. What do they represent at the moment? Nothing. You got Speakman. Speakman may as well be in the Labor Party as well. And no one knows who he is. If you walk down the street and ask somebody who Mark Speakman is, they've got no idea. Yeah. So this opposition will be in opposition for a long time. Yeah. Not because the Minns government's any good, just because the opposition's bloody hopeless.
Well, I guess the saving grace is that Minns is the right Labor. I mean, if we had a left of Labor Premier, we could be in a whole load of strife.
Well, they need to take somebody to roll him and then put somebody from the left in, and then we are in big trouble. So let's hope that doesn't happen for the time being, and let's hope the Libs and the Conservatives can regroup, reform, and come forward with a true Conservative policy base that people can join in with.
Maybe they can tap you on the shoulder, mate.
Who knows, Stephen? It's a big, wide world out there.
Yeah. Oh, well, I really appreciate it, Rod. This has been a fantastic discussion with you, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. But thank you very much.
It's been my absolute pleasure. And at any time, Stephen, I'd love to do it again.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you.